Good morning, church, and welcome to another devotional. I wanted to read from Matthew 7:5. It's a criticism that Jesus lobs at the scribes and the Pharisees. Verse 5 says, "You hypocrite, take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." In a sermon a while back, I spoke to this idea that the term hypocrite, it means actor. In our time, it has transitioned to mean somebody who's two-faced. And Jesus definitely addresses that here. But in Jesus' time, this word would have meant actor. And in this passage, Jesus makes a point to the scribes and to the Pharisees that their sin is actually greater than the sin of the people that they're accusing. They're worse off. But I wanted to explore a hypothetical. What if the symptom, or what if the words that Jesus said to the scribes and the Pharisees was, "You hypocrite, first take the speck out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the log out of your brother's eye"? Would Jesus still say, "You hypocrite"? Would Jesus still be so rough, be so critical of the Pharisees and the scribes? You see, in God's eyes, sin is despicable and disgusting no matter the size. The issue that God takes with sin is not so much its severity, but it's our desire to recognize it. It might be a speck, it might be a log, but Jesus' criticism is not of the fact that there was a speck or that there was a log. It was the failure to recognize that something was wrong. So the question is, what does it take to recognize not just the severity of your sin, but its presence altogether? In the alternate reality where Jesus says, take the speck out of your own eye before you can take the log out of your brother's, what would our response be? Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Lutheran pastor who died in a concentration camp, said, "If my sinfulness appears to me to be in any way smaller or less detestable in comparison with the sin of others, I am not recognizing my sinfulness at all." It's crazy to think that our minimizing of our own sins makes us equivalent, puts us on the same level as somebody who doesn't recognize their sinfulness at all. And our desire is always that, right? It's always to notice whether we have a log or a plank or what our brother has in our eye. And we always want to come out ahead. We can't speak into somebody's life if we're not morally superior. Like we recognize that. How can I speak into somebody's life when I'm doing worse than they are? If my sins are greater, how dare I speak into their lives? So naturally, we want to minimize. We want to make our sin seem less important, less damaging, less expansive than somebody else's. When we live in a state of finding fault in others, we predictably focus on the specks and we turn it into matters of vital importance. We notice that speck and we say, this is vitally important in that person's life. Yet we might minimize, we might brush over what's wrong in ours. And is it important? Yes. Is it vitally important? Well, I guess it depends. I guess it depends on what our relationship with God looks like. So going back to my original question, if you had a speck in your eye and a log in your brother's, would you be better off? Bonhoeffer said no. Jesus seems to indicate no. There is just this illusion that somehow it is objectively worse. But in fact, in our minimizing of our own sin and our failure to recognize its importance, maybe out of good desires, out of desires to say, look, I'm coming to you from a place that's maybe a little bit better off than what you're in, and I want to speak into your life. But in doing so, we minimize our own sinfulness. How we treat those around us, especially believers. I know it's very easy to point at unbelievers and say, well, they're acting wrong. But what does our relationship, what does our interaction look like with believers? Are they treated as lesser or worse in our heart, in our mind, or in our words, in our actions? Do we want to help them, or do we just want to make ourselves look worse? Yet Jesus has a different approach. Jesus in this passage, he talks about the fact that refer to them as brothers. He refers to them as brothers. There is an inherent need for a relationship. Whether we maintain that relationship with the people who we criticize is important. Do we interact with them? Do we understand them? Do we relate to them? And only then can we speak into their lives. Only then can we say, you know my faults and I know yours. And I can speak to you not because I want to be morally superior, but because we both understand there are things that we don't see. Let our sins be recognized to be just as sinful, just as damaging, just as detestable as the sins of others, so that in minimizing our own sinfulness, we might be acting as though we are sinless altogether. Going into this week, let that be the words, let those be the actions that you watch out for. God bless and take care.